Most people think the ducks probably just quack. There's a lot of other different noises. You got to learn to speak their language.
And that's what Ryan Maxwell has tried to do since childhood.
I started spending quite a bit of my money on calls because you just kind of get obsessed with it to a point, I guess. And I'd bought in another manufacturer's call, and shortly after I received the call in the mail, I was blowing it and it broke. Nothing I had done. It was just it was a material defect is what it was. So I took that call instead of buying a new one and decided, I wonder if I can fix this. So I started messing around and trying to create parts and gluing pieces back together. And throughout that process, I learned quite a bit about the call and the dynamics of it, how it works, stuff I didn't know. And I decided, you know what, I bet if I had the tools, I could just about figure out how to do this. And so that's pretty much where it all began. It can really be made out of anything, but the density of the material is what makes the call, what gives it its crisp sound. Each material, like different woods, have different densities, and that plays a big factor in the sound.
Soon Ryan realized he was sitting on a potential call gold mine. His dad's countertop business created a lot of scraps out of high-quality materials.
The material that we're using for countertops is acrylic material. Even though it doesn't come in acrylic rods like a lot of these call makers are buying their supply in acrylic rods, it comes in sheets like this. So what I do is I take these scrap pieces and I take them to the table saw and rip them down into 3 pieces. So when I layer them, I'm going to end up with a block that's 1.5 inches thick. So when I use my adhesive and glue these together, like you see in this piece, this is going to be one solid piece. From there, from this rod, I'll make cuts depending on what style of call or how big of a piece I need. I'll make those cuts and cut it down into the little blocks that are to working size. And then once I get the block the size I want and figure out what type of call I'm going to turn, I take it to the lathe and start cutting. I started with duck calls. There's a lot to it. It looks like a pretty simple piece, but you know, 1/1000th of an inch on these things can make or break how the call sounds, how it works, how it blows, everything like that. So I still think a duck call is probably the hardest call to turn by hand, just because of all the pieces and parts and shapes and everything that goes into it. It's a gamble. It's a lot of trial and error. You'll make a lot of firewood at first. Most of the time you don't know until you actually put a reed in that call and put some air through it and start making those cuts on the reed and start making those changes. I obviously like turning material that would normally be trash into something usable. There's a lot of benefit in that. Plus my input costs as far as material aren't hardly anything. But I do enjoy both the art of standing at the lathe and coming up with new calls and new designs and trying different things, kind of inventing some different things. But my favorite part is taking these calls in the field and seeing them perform.